Alrighty, hi everyone. Welcome back to the Alternatives Podcast. So good to have y'all back with us. Today we are talking about being courageous in the midst of fear. And this is something that I think is very applicable to what so many of us are facing right now. I am so excited for today's guest. This is my fiance, Ryan
Woo!
Oliver.
That's why she's not practicing social distancing.
No. But he's a paramedic. He is a people person and the perfect person to be talking about this topic. So I'm so excited for you guys to hear his perspective. But also, you guys might have not met him before, but you kind of recognize his work because he is the one that has really helped us get this podcast going. He helped us install all of the equipment.
Yes, he did. That we no longer use.
And he is always there for our tech questions and other things. So, Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So, fun fact, this actually is, I guess, technically my second episode with you guys. I can be heard in the very first episode dropping a pile of books in the background.
Oh, yeah.
It's about 2/3 of the way through, so you can go back and listen to that little gem. But yeah, Hannah kind of covered a lot of it. I have the joy and privilege of working as a paramedic down in the city of San Diego. I work in Oak Park, Fire Station 26, where I've been for the past 3 or so months. Alongside that, I also do some work with my company contracted out to FEMA, where we do disaster relief and things of that nature, as well as right now, coronavirus relief. And so I've been doing a lot of deployments out in the Imperial County area and just kind of working to help combat that. Other than that, I'm just kind of a general outdoorsman. If I'm not working or recording podcasts with Hannah, then I'm usually outdoors, kayaking, climbing, doing whatever.
Proposing in the woods.
Proposing in the woods, yes. Will we be married by the time this airs? No, we won't. Nope.
Yeah, we might be married by then.
No, not yet. But close, very close.
It's so funny when you just said how people would, how many people might know him. And I'm thinking he's a paramedic. I would hope that I wouldn't know you. But other than how I know you, like I would want you to be driving me somewhere.
Yeah.
So Ryan, can you, why is this something that you're passionate about?
Well, courage is something.
And wait, first, have you ever driven in an ambulance before you started this whole career?
So technically I am a third generation first responder. So I've spent time around them. My grandfather was a fire chief. My dad was a firefighter paramedic. My mother was an EMT. So I've just grown up in that environment, but never as a patient before.
Okay. That was fair enough. I just wanted to, I was wondering. So in answer to my question then, why is this something you're so passionate about? Other than it's in your blood, obviously, and maybe I think that's cool, but tell us.
Yeah, maybe the history kind of answers all of that. But for me personally, when it comes to the topic of courage, when I look at my childhood, I grew up afraid of everything, which is kind of contrary to what I think a lot of people would see now. But I was afraid of everything growing up. I was the kid that didn't want to jump into the pool on the deep end. I hated roller coasters. I hated doing so many things, and I was so afraid. And I eventually got to a point somewhere around middle school where I started to look back at that and just saw how much life I felt like I was missing out on. And through just a couple of really great mentors, they spoke a message into my life just about the importance of strength and courage. And they even turned me to scripture where we can see that God's single most commonly used command is be strong and courageous. And so with that, there's a lot of just goodness to be had. And as I started to explore and understand the character of God more, not just the character that we see in children's storybook Bibles or anything, but really start to explore the character of God, we see that we've got a ton of reason to be courageous, and that there's a ton of life to be had. in adopting that mindset.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Be strong and courageous. And it also, there's 365 verses on fear too. So we got a lot about fear. So what would it mean to be courageous? What would your definition of courageous be? I know you described early on as a kid, and there's also wisdom. And did you know how to swim? Jumping in. I mean,
fair.
Sometimes it's you just have to work through those things, but there is some bit of courage. There's courage and wisdom go hand in hand there.
Yeah, and there's an important distinction to understand about what courage is and then what courage isn't as well. To give a definition to courage, for years it felt like I was kind of going under this idea maybe of what courage was, but never had a definition till actually just a few years ago. I was working as a youth pastor at a church, and I was at a men's conference, and our guest speaker for that conference was actually a full-time pastor, as well as a full-time firefighter for the city of San Diego. And I had a previous background before working as a pastor, as an EMT, worked as a first responder. And I just heard him talk during the weekend just about how much he loved his job. And he specifically spoke about courage. His name's Derek Miller. He still does ministry down in San Diego. But he talked about courage, and he gave the definition that courage is not the absence of fear, but rather it's the absence of self. And so that completely changed the way that I started to look at what it meant to be courageous. And that actually was the very first step that led me to move towards being a paramedic and to actually step out of just doing vocational ministry at a church and rather to do ministry in the back of an ambulance. And to actually demonstrate.
I think you're going to have to unpack this a little bit.
Because,
well, because you think about it, absence of fear, courage, absence of fear, absence of self. Can you explain to the listeners what exactly you're meaning by that, or what he was meaning by that?
Yeah, so absence of self usually just breaks down to the fact that we have a selfless sense of service towards others. As we think about that in the current context, right now, one of the natural reactions, especially with COVID and just the chaos of everything that's going on right now, we naturally start to go into a naturally defensive posture where we start to become concerned about ourselves, and we start to become concerned about our own security and provision. And that's a totally normal reaction. That's not, people are not bad for doing that by any means. But we go into a mode where we really just start thinking about, as some people would put, like our four walls, shelter and clothing and transportation. We start to really conserve those things. But what it looks like to have an absence of self means that we actually start thinking about the others who are around us. That we start to see, especially in a Christian perspective, that we understand that God is our provider. And so with that, we then are able to go and serve others in a way that we become less concerned about ourselves and our provision, and more concerned about the provision of those that are around us as well. Okay. And so as we explore the idea of courage along with that, there's a lot of ways that we can kind of practice that, even in the world that we're in today. Sometimes an absence of self might look like wearing a face mask. Sometimes that looks like making sure that we are just conscious of the decisions that we make and how that affects other people. Sometimes that looks like not having to feel the need to just hang on to everything that we have. A lot of people develop a very conservation mindset during this time.
Sure.
Which again is totally natural. But sometimes having an absence of self looks like understanding the needs of others and making sure that those are met as well.
What is it like in your life?
So right now, that looks like continuing just to work in the kind of work that I'm in. Like I said, I actually stepped out of a spot working in vocational ministry at a church, so that I could actually go be a pastor in the back of an ambulance instead. And so one of the decisions that I made along with that is that I wanted to intentionally serve in communities where I felt like the gospel was needed. The gospel's needed everywhere, but there's some communities that I think definitely need to hear that message of hope that comes along with it a bit more than others. And so with that, the particular district that I work in, kind of the Southeast San Diego area, is a place that there's a lot of tensions right now. There's a lot of racial tension. That issue comes up almost every call that we run on right now. There's a lot of issues concerning poverty. There's a lot of issues concerning gang activity and sex trafficking and violence. There's a lot going on. And so part of being courageous in that right now is to actually intentionally work in areas like that. Part of it too is just that I don't have enough seniority to work anywhere else, but I enjoy actually working in these districts because of the opportunity that I get to meet people where they're at. That we get to change the narrative of a lot of just misconceptions, a lot of misconceptions regarding race, a lot of misconceptions regarding faith, and regarding just who the person of Jesus is, and how God regards people.
Well,
and so there's a lot of
opportunity in many
opportunity.
places. What an opportunity you have right there in the back of an ambulance. You do have a captive audience. Wherever you're going, whatever call you're out on, you can perhaps be a voice of reason too, or maybe even give hope to somebody too.
Yeah. If you ever want to see somebody who's looking for hope, it's usually someone who's in the back of an ambulance.
Oh, right. Amen. You bet. And that actually leads to the next question. What hope does someone have when they're afraid? Which I would imagine most people are not happy getting in the back of an ambulance.
No, not at all. I'm not always happy about getting in the back of an ambulance.
Thank God we have them though. I mean, really, what a blessing for people who do need it to have, and thank you for what you do and all the other responders that are out there, standing in the way to help people survive, live.
The reality about a lot of what we do is that for so many of us, we could never see ourselves doing anything else. We absolutely love the work that we do. As difficult as it is sometimes, as much of a weight and a burden as it carries with it sometimes, at the end of the day, we love what we get to do. And there are very few jobs in the world that are like it. And so that's part of why we continue to do it.
Well, there's a job and then there's a calling. I would think most of the women and men that work at alternatives, it's a calling too.
Completely.
It's the same type of thing. And what you said earlier about the self, it's taking ourselves out of the equation in so much of what we do, because there's somebody that needs to hear wisdom, truth, be spoken in love, and hope, for sure. So what hope, we didn't get to that question. I want you to, you're not going to get away from me here, Ryan. What hope does someone have when they're afraid in the back of the ambulance or anywhere?
Yeah, I think that the absolute greatest hope that we can ever have in something is hope in Jesus. And that is such a cliche thing. And I feel like that answer has been given a million times over. But one of the things that I personally also feel passionate about, besides just the idea of courage, is kind of seeing cliche phrases like that redeemed, and that people would actually begin to understand something different about the character of Jesus. In light of our relationship with Jesus, for those of us who are believers and followers in him, we see the world differently. We have the opportunity to see especially the ideas of success and failure differently. ultimately what it really seems to come down to for a lot of people is we have this deep-seated fear and rejection of failure. But failure, as it turns out, especially in light of Christ, is really not that bad a thing. In fact, in some cases, we could argue it's not a bad thing at all. If we look outside of the Bible, we can look to people like Thomas Edison, who famously said, "I now know 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb." We can look to a lot of people who had these just massive crash and burn failures that went on to discover success as a result of those things. We can even look towards the Bible and see the same thing out of people like Peter. Man, Peter screwed some stuff up. He said some stuff that let's be honest, I would say. He did some things that a lot of us could view as failure, but he ends up going to be the rock that Christ builds his church on. He ends up going to experience what I would regard as a lot of success in ministry. And he ends up developing a strong sense of courage. He speaks boldly into things. And so we see that failure in light of Christ is all of a sudden not this big thing to be rejected, but rather sometimes it is the means by which God directs us towards success. It's the means that he uses us often to pull us closer to him. And so because of that, we can look at fear a little bit differently, because like I said, more often than not, it seems that fear is tied to a sense of failure. And so if we look towards God for our security, if we look towards him for our provision and for our definition and idea of what it looks like to be successful in life, then all of a sudden we don't have to have fear anymore. Because Jesus says that the world is overwhelming, but don't be afraid because I have overcome the world.
I really like what you said, the quote of, what was it, 10,000 things.
Yeah,
ways.
Thomas Edison has 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb.
Yeah. And just like that recognition of like failure, like can be a really good thing. It can teach you what not to do and how to not.
You're one step closer to a success too, I would think.
Right, exactly. One step closer to doing the right thing. And so I love that. And this big fear. What's a good first step when somebody has acknowledged fear in themselves?
That in and of itself is probably the first big step, is acknowledging fear. Like Derek had said before at that men's conference that I was at, courage is not the absence of fear. Instead, it's just the absence of self. So part of it is acknowledging the fact that we have fear. For some of us, and there's a handful of people who I think will resonate with this idea, we kind of have like an on-off switch. First responders tend to be people who are pretty good at that. It's not that we never feel fear. It's that sometimes we have the ability just to kind of delay it for a little while. We have the ability to just kind of push it off, and then we'll deal with the consequences later. But for most people who don't have that on-off switch, acknowledging fear is an important first step, followed by just doing the next right thing. Somebody well before me came up with that idea of do the next right thing. I've tried researching whose idea that is originally. What was that?
You said you tried researching. I said, who said that?
Yeah, I can't find who the original person was. There's a handful of books about it. But the idea of just do the next right thing. Sometimes we try and draw out this long game plan for how we're going to go about something, how we're going to conquer this monumental challenge. When more often than not, I found 99% of the time, the next right step, the immediate one in front of me, is almost always pretty apparent. And usually as I do that, the next right step after that is pretty apparent. And so being courageous and pushing past fear usually looks like just doing the little baby steps of doing the next right thing, and then the next right thing, and the next right thing.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Yeah, and I really like that. We did a podcast a while back with Julie, our nurse manager, and we were talking about like switching your mindset and like cultivating a heart of gratitude. And what we were talking about is little by little, one step at a time. And I love that because it's not like you're told to go climb the mountain. It's get to the first, I'm not a hiker, what is it called? Switchback.
Switchback.
So you get to the first switchback, and then you get to the next one, and then it kind of just goes from there, which I think is so much like more attainable. And I think it makes it a lot easier for people to kind of feel at peace about it, because they're not expected to do this big thing. They're expected to take this step.
Or the expression, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
Exactly.
I'm an eater. I'm not a hiker.
But that doesn't always change the fact that it's not scary.
Completely.
What would you tell our listeners that just feel like kind of crippled by fear?
Because it can paralyze you.
Yeah. Completely. I think that when I think back to my own story and my own experiences with fear, it really comes back to that internal perspective that I have. When I look internally, that's when fear kicks in. That's when anxiety kicks in. That's when a lot of issues start developing for me. However, when I'm able to have an external viewpoint where I start looking outward, that's when courage starts setting in. That's when strength starts setting in. And one thing that's important to note is that, and maybe there's a podcast for another time, but the ideas of strength and courage, as we stated in those Bible verses, be strong and courageous. Strength and courage are two closely related concepts. And one of the things that's most notable about strength is that the purpose of the strength that we're given is for the sake of others. We might have personal strength. We might have things that we're naturally good at. We might have strength of character, but the intent in Scripture is always for that strength to be used to the benefit and goodness of others. And so as we tie that then to courage, as we start to have an external viewpoint, as we start to look outward towards how we serve others, towards how we meet the needs of the 8 to 15 people that God's placed supernaturally and strategically in our lives, we start to develop an attitude that's less crippled by fear, and we start to focus less on that conservation mindset of conserving our resources, of conserving ourselves. We start looking outward towards helping other people.
Well, I think what was the earlier part, an absence of self, and I think that comes around full circle there, that how that works for that. What's a recent challenge that you have overcome? Deep end pool? High diving board? No.
Oh my gosh, I feel like there's a ton that it feels like I'm still in the process of overcoming.
But of course, that's right, because it's always, we're always, when we've overcame, we'll be meeting our maker, and you will be on the podcast.
Yeah, when I think about a challenge that I've overcome, I think back to the do the next right step. And so It's like, well, I can tell you what the last step was, but there's still plenty more ahead.
Exactly.
Right now, a lot of that just looks like this battle with COVID. It is a crazy time to be a healthcare worker right now. In part just because for me, I'm on this deployment schedule that has me gone literally about 50% of the time. And so doing that has been challenging, and working for 3-4 weeks straight while back home, Hannah's planning a wedding. I would like to say that we're planning a wedding, but let's be honest, she's the MVP here. But trying to coordinate that from a couple hundred miles away, alongside just trying to have like a good, healthy work-life balance. One of the things about being a first responder is that we need downtime to go do things that are not first responding. And so during COVID, a lot of those activities have been interrupted, especially for me. I am an extrovert to the max. I love being around people. So it's been kind of difficult not always having the opportunity to be around our small group, to not be around friends and be outdoors doing things. So it's been just a lot of the mental perseverance of just do the next right thing as we push through COVID, as we push through deployments, as we push through uncertainty in wedding planning, as we push through difficult social interactions right now.
And I think pushing through, or moving forward, it can be difficult for sure. You mentioned something there, and I wanted to ask you, and it's of course not on the questions, but
we're good at that.
well, it's like, duh, why didn't we think of this? As a first responder, where as you give and give and give, because it's a that's part of your job. Where do you have a debriefing protocol, you yourself, that you do for your own soul care, so to speak? Working at Alternatives, we have different things that we, between our prayer in the morning and whatnot. But I know for myself, I need my own soul care for me, aside from the staff, with people that mentor to me, to just pour into me, to turn around, to come back to do this, to pour out again. So totally off the topic, but I want to know. So we're here.
Yeah. One of the things that I learned actually about the same time that I was learning a lot about courage was the importance and significance of the idea of Sabbath. Jesus even describes it at one point as kind of a above all else type commandment of hey, if you're going to pick and choose what you're going to follow this one. So the idea of Sabbath has become incredibly important. And I think that we can see that Jesus understood times of need for people. And Jesus was, often criticized for working on the seventh day, or healing people on the seventh day. And so I think that Jesus established a very good idea of what it looks like to just make sure that we have dedicated space and time for rest. But we recognize the importance and significance of service as well. So what that's looked like for me is when I finish a deployment, Hannah and I usually have at least one day, hopefully several, where we go off and we don't talk about paramedic stuff. We don't really talk about anything that we don't want to talk about, and we just go do something fun, whether that be.
I hope it's always that way.
Yeah, 100%.
No, and I mean that I'm not being sarcastic. I think that is something that as a couple you need to have that, because kids will come, house buying will come, puppies. Completely.
Yeah, recently that's looked like we got to go on a camping trip that was very refreshing. Spent a good amount of time in the Eastern Sierra. We took a trip to downtown Disney not too long ago and just went out and had dinner. As kind of a honeymoon preview. We're gonna honeymoon eventually at Disney World, hopefully. and just little things to just kind of help us reset and spend time together. And inevitably that always leads to time spent with the Lord between the two of us as well, where we just get a chance to refresh and just be silent and listen to the voice of God, and just allow Him to speak into just what's going on in life.
Mm-hmm. Good deal. How can our listeners get in contact with you? Can they reach out to you on Instagram, or they can reach out here, and Hannah can, we know Hannah's connected to you, so they can get information to you, but how best?
Well, I was going to say you could call 911, but don't do that.
Oh my gosh.
I am.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. one of the easiest ways to follow me is Instagram. I'm actually hoping to start using that a little bit more as things are slowing down a little bit. My Instagram is ryguy92. I think it's ry.guy92. We'll update that later. On Instagram, and then my email is a great way to get a hold of me as well. It's just ryanpoliver92@gmail.com.
It is rye.guy92.
Rye.guy92.
Do you want to share your other account?
Oh yeah, my outdoor adventure account that I need to start posting on again. That one's explore, so it's like the word explore without an E. explore_SD. Yeah.
Yep. And
Hey,
that's
what's the P for in Ryan P. Oliver?
It's for Patrick.
very Irish.
I have
Yeah.
3 very Irish first names.
Yeah. RPO. Okay. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. I'm sure the listeners got many things out of that. I know I'm clinging to the next right step, because I think that's important when we just focus versus looking at what the world looks like. Just the next right step is a really good way to be courageous in the midst of fear. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in today. I hope you got something out of it. I know these are some uncertain times that we're in right now. So I know this is something that can really speak to the situation that we're all facing and the fear that we all have. If you guys are on social media, we would love to connect with you on Instagram. We are at Alternatives MC, and Facebook, we're just Alternatives Medical Clinic. Talk to y'all soon.